Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 152 for Monday, August 2nd, 2021. My name is Joel Duggan, and joining me, as always, is my friend Jonny, or as some of you may know him, the RTX Nightlight block himself, Pixel Riffs.
Hello. Yeah, I've been playing around with Amethyst blocks in RTX. It's been a lot of fun. We've also had a lot of fun in the render distance. This is the first show of the month, so thank you so much to all of the folks who support us on Patreon. If you are a patron supporter of the Spawn Chunks, you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the podcast, which you can get at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. You'll be able to hear more about what our guest has been up to lately, because today we are joined by Henrik Kniberg. Henrik is a game designer, developer, and coach at Mojang Studios and co-founder of GoClimate.com, but most recently, he's been working on terrain generation for the Caves and Cliffs update, and you can find him posting screenshots, videos, and his thoughts from the development process on Twitter at Henrik Kniberg. Henrik, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, and we've had a delightful discussion pre-show, but naturally we're going to be picking your brains about everything that's been going on terrain-wise, both in the recent experimental snapshots and even before that, because of course terrain generation has been part of this update for a little while. Normally when we start off the show, we like to let our guest let us know what they've been doing in Minecraft lately, and so obviously we know some of what you've been working on more publicly, but do you get a chance to play Minecraft a lot in your personal life? Is that something you avoid because it's more of a work thing? How does the balance of that work out for you?
Oh, I still love playing Minecraft, but I play in periods, so there could be a period where I play almost every evening, and then there could be a couple of months where I'm kind of tired of it and I don't play at all. So it varies, but I have my old server, which turned 10 years this year.
Oh, wow.
And I got a bunch of friends and family in there, so sometimes I go in there and hang out. I guess the latest thing was helping my daughter kidnap some glow squids for her nightclub.
Oh, brilliant. That's
Sweet.
That's great. And as a 10-year-old server, has that world been persistent throughout all of the updates, or is that something you reset?
It's been persistent. I'm very stubborn about keeping that server going.
That's great. And what a great perspective to have as well. We heard Agnes talk in one of the recent videos about wanting to keep her 10-year-old world going as well. So it's great to know that the guy who's been doing all of the modifications to terrain is as passionate at keeping that world alive. That's great. That's super good. So Joel, how's the Citadel going? What are you up to?
I'm coming close to the end of this zombie geode farm, which I thought was going to be a much smaller project, but it turns out when you've got a lot of redstone and water mechanics to deal with, that it does take a little bit more time. Mm-hmm. This weekend was mostly decorating the farm, finally deciding on some block palettes. Went with blue terracotta, which looks purple in the world, which goes very well with the amethyst because of the geode that's nearby and the drown that are coming in from the spawner. We also went and did some weapon building where we built a sword that had sweeping edge and smite 4, I think. I wanted 5, but we couldn't find enough books to do it. And so now it's a much more viable source of copper. And I haven't been sitting there and smacking them constantly, but whenever I walk by a full gaggle of drowned sitting on the platform and I give them a whack with the sword, we end up with 1 or 2 ingots. So we've got nearly a stack of ingots from just every time I walk by while I'm decorating the area, I kind of give them a smack and I end up with some free iron, which is really cool. I really enjoy the break of going from the medieval area where I'm basically under that constant kind of build mode of like, how do I blend these textures to make this look as realistic as I can? Because that's the fun challenge that I'm dealing with in that area. But when I decorate redstone, which is not something you see a lot, I'm even putting decorative blocks like behind my storage system, and it is visible. Like there's a window to the side of it. You can see behind all the chests and stuff. But I've chosen things like smooth basalt and chiseled deep slate, and I've got some lights in the floor, giving like a bottom-up spotlight effect with purple glass and that kind of stuff. It's a much more freeing experience because rather than trying to blend textures and trying to figure things out, you're basically just down to picking a color and saying, does this look cool? Yes or no? And if it's yes, then that's fine. And you don't have to worry about matching anything because you're underground. You don't have to worry about the outside of the build because you're underground. So it's been a really fun, freeing experience just kind of putting up the decoration behind the redstone. I mean, you're a builder. Do you decorate redstone stuff at all, or is it mostly just hide the farm underground somewhere?
A bit of both, really. Like, it totally depends. Right now, I am kind of bucking the trend by building a river biome drowned farm instead of a zombie spawner drowned farm. And that I wanted to be very functional, but it's also going to be close to where I plan to expand my kingdom on Empire's SMP. And so everybody expected me to just build something that was going to be like copper ingot drops and probably fairly concealed underground, and instead I built it using the same blocks that I've been using to build the houses around this kingdom, which is a mixture of stripped oak, stripped birch, and then sandstone as a gradient. But I built all of that up on the surface around this farm, which took a lot longer because, of course, I had to gather all of the materials for it instead of just building it out of cobblestone or something I'd been able to, strip mine en masse. But I think the end result is looking a lot better. So it's something I always try to do, but then when I'm working on technical projects, I find myself much more absorbed with the technical side of things than I do with making it look pretty, at least at first. I'm also starting to blur the lines between the two, and things like my copper aging system that I have set up now, where the copper is delivered to a bunch of redstone modules by flying machines, has that kind of beautiful redstone kind of thing where, because it's modular and it's repeating patterns and everything, and I'm using slightly more colorful blocks to run the redstone along, it ends up looking a lot more interesting as a contraption in itself, rather than having to decorate it too heavily to conceal the fact that there is redstone spaghetti under all of it.
I remember seeing the copper farm video, and I think I might have sent you a comment privately saying, like, it looks like desert foliage.
Yeah, it's kind of got a bit of that, especially the magenta terracotta somehow just kind of pops out as being the same color as like those cactus blooms and stuff that I think comes together pretty well.
Henrik, do you identify more as a redstone builder, technical farmer? Do you do more aesthetic building in Minecraft or landscaping? What's your normal MO when you do have time to jump into the game?
It actually varies quite a lot. During some periods, I want to build some weird farm or something, and I really go all in on that. During other periods, I'm trying to make a beautiful house for myself, and other times I'm just exploring the world. So it kind of depends, actually.
I feel like taking a very varied approach to it is probably a good thing, like being almost like a jack of all trades in Minecraft, both as a player and as a developer, because you're touching sort of every part of the game at that point. So you kind of have more of a holistic approach to it, and so whenever you start making changes, you know what those changes are going to do to affect your own experience of the game.
Yeah, it's useful to have as wide a perspective as possible.
And I think I get a lot of questions when I'm streaming or in my video comments about how to make Minecraft interesting again, and I think those often come from people who have one particular thing they like to do, and my answer to that is always diversify, and you can try and do that in ways that help the aspects of the game that you like to do. So if you are more of a redstone builder, then considering building stuff that complements those farms. If you are typically a builder and you don't like doing redstone, then consider building some redstone contraptions or technical things that provide some of the materials for you, and that way you get more of a balance of everything the game is capable of. And I find that makes Minecraft a much more rich experience. It's something that's happened to me over the last few years with trying to create a long-term single-player world and dive into more of these technical projects. I find that everything sort of goes together and harmonizes very well when you have that sort of approach to the game.
Although I've noticed that as a player, no matter how much I try to be broad, there's always a lot of blind spots.
Yeah.
So for example, if I'm doing tech stuff, there's infinitely more people that are infinitely better at tech stuff than me. Same thing if I'm building things. There's always other people that doing what I do, but a lot more of it. And then there's like blind spots.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so useful with the community, videos and stuff, just to see what are people doing, what are they struggling with, what are they. Like a concrete example, which was pretty surprising to me, was with when we introduced the honey block. That was a little bit of a sideshow to the bees update. It was like, oh, we got this block. What are we gonna do with it? Should it just be a building block or what? And that kind of became my task to look at it. And I was like, At the time, I had just been doing some parkour stuff with my kids on my server. So I looked at the honey block like, maybe this thing could be a fun parkour thing. Like you can slide on it. So I prototyped that, concluded that, yeah, this is fun. And then I showed it to my kids, And then one of my kids was like, "Hey, honey is sticky. You should make it work like slime in pistons." I'm like, "Oh yeah, that was a good idea." So just did that without just as a side thing and put it out in a snapshot. And to my big surprise, what I thought would happen was I thought everyone would be as excited as me about the parkour thing. But the biggest surprise was everyone being really angry at, "Hey, you put out this honey block. It shouldn't stick to slime. It should stick to everything else, but not slime." I'm like, "What?" And then once I started realizing why, it made perfect sense. But it turned out that was apparently a very, very important thing for the technical community that I had no idea about. It was just a blind spot. And it was real easy to fix, but I would have missed it if it wasn't for that feedback.
Oh boy, is it, because you are now the reason that I am crossing the end void using honey block flying machines. I did that in my hardcore world and gave most of my viewership a heart attack this week because I was sat in a boat trying to cross the void that way, and I had done that on the Empire's server recently, but because I hadn't put a block behind us, me and a bunch of our server mates got on this honey block flying machine that was just one stick of honey out to both sides, and we ended up lagging out and falling off the flying machine because the server couldn't keep up with our position. And I did the same thing, but with slightly more safety measures in place in my hardcore world, and I had everybody in my comment section going, "You're crazy! Why are you doing this again?" But yeah, I've been going out there to try and get an elytra before I fight the dragon to kind of change up the formula of the dragon fight a little bit, because I find the dragon fight usually goes the same way, and I want to introduce a bit more variety into it. And
you pulled it off?
Yeah, I got all the way to the other side. It was very nerve-wracking for me, but managed to make it in time. And miraculously, I hopped up onto the island, turned around, and an End City ship rendered in, basically, not too far from my starting position in the end. So,
wow. Yeah,
managed to escape the dragon, but I'll be back because there's no way to get back to the overworld without killing the dragon at this point. But so thank you for the honey block is really what I'm trying to say, because that's really been fantastic to work with, especially if it's you can make slime block contraptions but with slightly different properties, and somehow those properties are what makes all the difference.
It's so cool to see what people do with these things. It's just mind-blowing.
Well, speaking of taking a break from Minecraft when you get stuck, this week in the news, the Echoing Void has arrived. Released July 28th, 2021, Echoing Void is the latest DLC from Minecraft Dungeons, and it's here and available on Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, Windows PC, and Xbox One. Conquer new challenges, collect epic gear, and fight your way through 3 new missions using everything from elytra gliding to shulker floating. Free updates to the base game include powerful new enchantments and the Gauntlet of Gales, a windy new mission that puts your puzzle-solving abilities to the test. The new Minecraft Dungeons Ultimate Edition or the Ultimate DLC Bundle offer a way to get all of the Arch-Villager storyline DLC in one go. And we'll have a link to the Dungeons Echoing Void official launch trailer in our show notes. Jonny, I know you've had some time to dive into Echoing Void DLC. How has the experience been?
It's been great. I played through it on stream over 2 streams because the first half of the DLC involves you revisiting old levels. There are 6 Endermen who have come through, or Enderlings. They're kind of a new breed of Endermen, something we've not really seen before this DLC, that appear out of the Stronghold portal and take one of the Eyes of Ender with them. It kind of, attaches into their chest in this very kind of otherworldly way. And you have to go around and defeat these 6 mini-bosses, which are the giant kind of hammer-fisted Enderman variants, in some of the levels from the base game. So you have to revisit Creeper Woods, Desert Temple, High Block Halls, some of the standard levels. And they each basically appear in a side area that is now a permanent part of those levels. So it was a place that maybe was fenced off before or wasn't immediately noticeable, or just they've added a corridor to one place that leads to a completely different area. And these areas, I find, are really well designed. They've kind of taken some of their cues from the more recent DLC, like the Hidden Depths, the one that kind of introduced ocean environments, and the amount of depth of field tricks they're using and playing around with. You're going down a spiral staircase and you can see your destination at the bottom of the level, but you're kind of working your way down, fighting stuff as you go, and this stuff starts to swim into focus. It's really, really clever, and it kind of lends a new twist to the levels that seemed a little bit more I won't say basic, because that's kind of doing the design team a disservice, but fairly straightforward before. And now they've really learned a few tricks as they've gone on in terms of the level design, the art direction, the environments, and used all of that in adding these new areas to the levels. Once you get hold of all of those Eyes of Ender, you go to the Stronghold, and there's an area that you can explore within the Stronghold level itself, but by that point, I just wanted to get to the end DLC levels and see what was going on in the end. And I got through the whole of End Wilds and got very close to the end before I ended up losing all of my lives and ran out of time on that stream. So I went back in a second stream, and those levels are beautiful. I think it's a really interesting vision of what the end could look like if it was a more lush and alien landscape. There's environmental hazards. It's more than just a bunch of Endermen there for you to fight. It's poisonous plants that release poison clouds if you disturb them. So there's stuff like that to avoid. There are pools of this void liquid which gives you a debuff that means it multiplies any damage you take. So if you've just stepped into one of these things, you need to go and find a place to hide. Otherwise, anything that hits you is going to hit you 4 times as hard.
Wow.
There are some really neat design elements. There are trees which hang downwards over the void, which I think is something I'll have to find a screenshot of because they look really neat, and it kind of goes with what we think of as the imaginary physics of the end being slightly different, it feeling more like a sort of outer spacey kind of environment where gravity doesn't necessarily have to apply the same way. And last of all, the final boss fight is truly epic. On maximum difficulty with 1 respawn left, it was a challenge. And it's a boss fight like the Heart of Ender fight at the end of the main story, where there are multiple phases and different attacks it does. It becomes like a bullet hell environment for a while, where there's projectiles firing everywhere and you have to find a safe spot to hide while the boss is protected. It's very chaotic, but a really spectacular way to end the DLC and end the Orb of Dominance storyline they've been working with. It was 10 out of 10. I did not get around to Gauntlet of Gales yet, and that's something I'll probably revisit in my own time, but this DLC was enough to make me want to play through the entire game again and not just do a melee only character like I have been doing. I've been
just hearing this makes me want to go play Dungeons right now.
Yeah, it's great. And you and I actually had the opportunity, although I think you popped in a little late for the group that I had after the Creator Summit, where we were trying to do the no weapons playthrough with multiple characters. And so it's clear that the team has put a lot of time and effort into this DLC, and it really pays off. Henrik, have you had a chance to play much of Dungeons in your own time?
Yeah, when it just came out, I played quite a lot for a while, but then I kind of stopped. But now I got excited to try again, I think.
Yeah.
But I got curious. I think when you mentioned shulker flying, what's shulker flying?
So there are shulkers around some of the end city environments, which if they attack you, they levitate you just like they do in vanilla Minecraft. So, typically you get sort of stunned and you end up taking full damage once you fall back down. And it's usually okay until you get enemies with ranged attacks around you, because then they're shooting you in the air and you can't really do much about it. But there are mechanics throughout the level where you have to encourage the shulker pellets to follow you, and then once they reach a door, they will kind of swerve to one side and activate a mechanism that levitates part of the door, and that opens the door for you. So there are puzzle elements to the level where you have to have one of the shulker bullets kind of follow you, and those are really well designed. I think the one thing they need to fix up is that they can't always follow you exactly, which is probably better for the player most of the time, but a lot of the time you have to guide them upstairs, and sometimes they just run into the bottom of the stairs and despawn, and it takes a little bit of fiddling to make sure it's going the right direction. But a pretty satisfying mechanic and a neat way to use enemies to your favor in that environment.
Without jumping in Minecraft Dungeons as we traditionally know it in most video games, do you get to use the shulker bullets to like levitate yourself to like another accessible level in a dungeon, or is there anything like that going on?
With the elytra that you grab about halfway through End Wilds, there are then barrels of fireworks that you use effectively as launch pads. And that actually does a really neat thing where the game has been an isometric perspective the entire time, but once you are thrown up into the air like that, it switches to a top-down perspective, and it smoothly transitions into you seeing all of these islands from above and being able to glide between them. So the shulker bullets don't really give you enough levitation to get you off the ground for long enough, and they add that stun effect, so it's more of a disadvantage for the player. But they have other ways of introducing you flying between the islands, which obviously, as people who visited the end in vanilla Minecraft know, can be fairly, sparse. You end up finding the thinnest route through these islands and trying to land on the nearest available one in case you run out of fly time. But it's a really well designed aspect to the end DLC and really makes it feel a lot like it's influenced by vanilla Minecraft mechanics.
I haven't had a chance to play Echoing Void. I haven't really had a chance to play any of the DLC yet. Big old yet added on that. Because as Henrik mentioned, even just listening to you talk about the end, Echoing Void really makes me want to get in and see it. I love the way things look. The neon chest plates against the black Enderman with the multiple eyes and all the different attacks and stuff that they do. It's very... It fits that kind of like weird style that Minecraft has, but then also creates some... It's like creepy but cool at the same time, and creepy but accessible maybe is the best way to say it. The floating abilities look really, really cool. And I don't know whether this is something from another DLC because I'm not as familiar as you might be, but it looked like in the trailer there was like a purple musketeer outfit, like feather in the cap sort of deal. And it just weirdly fits with all the purple.
Yeah,
I don't know why.
My favorite armor set from this so far is one that's a shulker armor. So effectively, you're like wearing a shulker box on your head, and then the lower half kind of becomes the torso, and you've just glued shulker elements onto yourself. But it's such a neat design. They always take those kind of like loose ideas of what a Minecraft armor set should be and ramp them up until they're very cartoony but super fun. And yeah, it just seems like the kind of thing you would have to improvise as you were scavenging your way through this alien landscape. It's really neat.
I'm always really torn between playing on the Xbox Series X that I have because I have access through Game Pass Ultimate and playing on the PC where I would then stream the content. But one of the things that I think is really interesting is the DLC bundle, or just if you're new to the Minecraft Dungeons, the Ultimate bundle, because I went looking and it is nearly 50% off to get all DLC at once if you haven't yet got into them. Or even if you've picked up one or two and you haven't gotten the other four, which is I think my situation, it's still cheaper to just go ahead and get the DLC bundle. Minecraft Dungeons is incredibly affordable for the content that I now know is there with these 6 DLCs.
Yeah, and considering that they've added Gauntlet of Gales to the Howling Peaks area now as well, and you've got the Stronghold plus 2 more levels in the end DLC. Add all the DLCs together plus all of the hidden levels that you get from the base game, and there are something like 50 levels in this game now. And I remember a lot of the discussion about Minecraft Dungeons when it initially was released, about it feeling like it didn't have enough content in the game. And I don't think that's something anybody can say about it now. I mean, for less than the price of a typical AAA game release, you get so much. If you're buying all of the DLC at the same time for a $40 game, US prices, it's definitely worth it. And if you want to replay on higher difficulty levels, I think that's really where the game opens up, because that's when you get access to more armor and weapons, and the ability to kind of change up your class a lot more opens up when you get into adventure and apocalypse difficulty. So that's where the game lives for me now. I'm on the highest possible difficulty setting, and still punching my way through everything, doing millions of damage per hit and stuff. It's a great way of making the player feel incredibly powerful at that stage.
Well, we obviously want to take advantage of having Henrik on the show and talk about the landscape changes that are happening in Caves and Cliffs Part 2. And to kick things off, we actually have an email on just that. What do you think we get into that email?
Absolutely, yes. And if you'd like to email the show, give your thoughts on any of the stuff we talk about on each show week to week, the email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. This one comes in from the Piano Man 89. Sing us a song, Piano Man. And this one, the subject of this email is Caves and Cliffs Survival. Just discovered your podcast recently, and I've become very interested in following you guys, your perspectives and input on Minecraft. I'm new to the game, having only started playing in November of 2020, and since then I've become obsessed with trying to do as much as I can without using creative mode. I'm trying to learn as much as I can so that I can feel confident progressing through the game. So I decided to try the Caves and Cliffs experimental snapshots to experience all that you've been mentioning on the podcast. I started the world on survival in normal difficulty, and I'm shocked at how much more challenging it is. I've only been playing about 5 to 6 hours on this new world, and I didn't run into any iron for a solid 3 hours of gameplay, and I've died to mobs at least half a dozen times, compared to only once in my other world where I've put in at least 75 hours worth of survival gameplay. Is this level of difficulty normal compared to what both of you have experienced in your trials of the Caves and Cliffs experimental snapshot? I dug down in a stair-step fashion to -20 on the y-axis and never encountered a cave. Even after travelling 1,500 blocks in opposite directions to look for mountains, I didn't encounter any mountains or caves really at all. Are my experiences normal, or does this sound like a really unfortunate exception? Sorry for the long email, but I appreciate you guys taking the time to read and respond. The Piano Man 89 died from unknowingly triggering a TNT trap in a desert temple. Still a lot to learn, I see. But yes, this, as far as difficulty goes, I'm sure, Joel, you've had a similar experience to me. This seems fairly typical in terms of the challenge of dealing with mobs and getting iron and getting geared up for what we think of as the sort of early game caving expedition in current generation. Finding iron closer to the surface has been something we've taken for granted for a while, but I know you've been streaming the snapshot a little bit more than I have, and you had a bit of a struggle getting hold of iron in the first place, didn't you?
Yes, and I actually remember having a struggle in the snapshots for 1.17 as well before they adjusted a few things. But in the second snapshot, I definitely felt that, I called it the iron gate, where you need more iron to go into these big dark caves, but the iron is in the big dark caves to begin with, and so you're in this constant battle of like how do I get there? It's a chicken and an egg problem. And sometimes you luck out and you can go into a village and beg, borrow / steal iron from the villagers that are there, depending on what's in the chests. But I want to kind of put a big asterisk in this and say that I wasn't planning on this being a permanent world because it is an experimental snapshot. And I was also playing and exploring probably faster than the average player would if they were trying to permanently inhabit a world, because I was on stream, I was trying to show off, and not show off myself, but show off the snapshot, show off the new terrain, explore as much as we could. And so I kind of was on the clock, and I could have done more to try and gear up before going into these caverns and having my butt handed to me, but I didn't. And so I know that kind of, not rush, but that kind of expedited kind of plan affected how I felt about the lack of iron early on. But I think after some hindsight and a couple of weeks now passed since I've done that, the unforeseen side effect of zero light spawning is that there are way fewer mobs on the surface, which is great for new players and good news for players that want to be left alone, like builders. But it means that I feel more concentrated mobs are happening underground. So if you're a confident player that's been playing this game for a while and you're used to what you feel you need before you go caving, you have to kind of check yourself and say, no. There's a lot more happening in these caves than I'm used to. And so it's this kind of like, you go in there, chest out, ready to go with maybe a chest plate or a pair of boots, and you realize quite quickly, no. You need a lot more than that, and you need to be a lot more cautious. You can't just rip through the caverns and go around every corner and expect to be able to tackle what you're dealing with, because there's a lot of things that come down from above. The caverns are so big you can't see what's happening. Henrik, when it comes to the difficulty that players are experiencing when they're trying to play in survival on the experimental snapshots, is that something that was designed to be more difficult with the terrain changes?
Not really. We never had any stated goal that the game should become more difficult. However, we do want to provide some strategy to mining in general. So one thing we're hoping to learn now from having shipped these experimental snapshots is to get these exact conversations going. To hear like what are the side effects of the terrain generation, the higher world height, the darkness changes, all these things together cause a systemic change to the game, right? And I think the jury isn't really in yet, because sometimes I see people put out videos saying, "Hey, everything is so much easier now. you can find a massive cave and go to the bottom of the world and find diamonds instantly, and it's too easy now. Please make it harder." So it seems to be I'm getting kind of mixed messages. Another thing which is a bit of a mystery is sometimes when people say it's harder, it's actually just different. Because as a new player, Minecraft is a hard game. You're going to get your butt handed to you the first time you play the game, almost inevitably, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't know anything, darkness comes and you die, and then you respawn and you die again. And that frustration seems to be, in a way, part of the excitement of the game, because then you want to figure out, how do I survive my first night? And what might be happening sometimes is people are used to finding iron in a certain way, and now it's different. And then they have to learn how to do that instead. So I'm not quite sure yet. Is it actually harder, or is it just different? My theory is that maybe we should increase the amount of iron a little bit in general. That's what we're leaning towards, but we'll probably have a conversation with the team after the vacations. But in the case of iron, for example, our thinking there has been kind of, we don't want it to be as obviously easy. You'll just find iron sitting around as soon as you see a cave entrance. Instead, you have to think like, am I gonna go inside a cave without iron? Am I gonna get leather armor before, or am I gonna keep running until I find cave near the surface? Because you can still find iron. You can still find iron near the surface, but it's less common, and there'll be smaller veins. But it is an option to just spend longer time on the surface looking inside cave entrances, and you will find iron sooner or later. Or are you going to go mountain climbing, find a high mountain somewhere, or go to a village? So basically, we want to give people options and not just serve iron kind of in their face. But again, it is a balance, and we might end up increasing iron a little bit just for that reason.
That's exactly what I like about these experimental snapshots, though, is the idea that you have to rethink the approach to the game that you've taken for granted for so long, and whether that stays as part of things, or if the terrain sort of gets scaled back and some of those things get reintroduced, like more frequent generation of iron. It does give you a little bit of a different approach to starting a new world, and I've spawned several new worlds in the second experimental snapshot and found radically different landscapes each time, and each one lends itself to a different approach of finding iron. So if I spawn next to a village, I look for golems, I look for blacksmiths, and I've noticed the villages actually get quite large in some of the experimental terrains. So I've found villages that have 2 blacksmiths with enough iron and iron armor pieces that I can be confident in getting a very fast start. Or I generate on a mountain that's already at Y90 and goes up to virtually what used to be build height, and so I can go further up and start to find where those pockets of iron get more and more as you go further up in the world. I think it's really fun having that amount of variety, but there will always be people who are, for want of a better term, traditionalists about where they should be finding this stuff. And I think people have an expected path through the game at this point that is going to be, the kind of thing that people will want to stay in the game to an extent while still providing all of those options. And that must be a real challenge from a development perspective.
It is. And another kind of challenge is variation. Like, one design goal has been variation. We want it to be fun to explore the world. And I think we've kind of nailed that so far. Just watching all the streams and videos, people seem to be having a blast just exploring the world.
Oh yeah,
which was my personal experience when developing. Was like, wow, I keep getting distracted just exploring the world, which was a good sign. But the downside to that is that means that you might happen to spawn in a world as a new player that just is really hard, much harder than for other people. Like in this case, couldn't find any caves, couldn't find any iron. That could happen, and that would be a very unfortunate experience for that player if that happens. So we're not quite sure where to go with that. I think it's just a trade-off we have to navigate, because on the one hand, we could make the world perfectly predictable. You'll always find this, and you'll find that, and it'll look like this, and it'll always be a certain experience. But that'll be kind of boring once you've had that one experience. Or we do it like we're doing it now with incredible amount of variation, but then there's a certain risk that the game may be too easy or too hard in some cases.
Yeah, when I was reading this email through and it said not finding any caves within 1,500 blocks, I thought that is extremely bad luck.
That's unusual. That's unusual.
Yeah, and I know surface cave entrances were sort of reduced a little bit in the second experimental snapshot, but even then, to have not found any route into the underground is quite bizarre.
Yeah, and they were just a tiny bit reduced, barely noticeable.
Yeah.
However, we do have an issue. We still have some issues with flooding. So that I'm pretty sure we're going to fix for the next snapshot, where we're looking for ways to make it possible for fewer caves to be flooded when you're near coastlines. But that's also a trade-off, because if we say that no caves are flooded, then A, that's kind of boring, but also B, then you get really messed up coastlines. So there's a lot of trade-offs we're having to figure out there.
Well, let's drill down into some of the more detailed stuff we wanted to ask about Caves and Cliffs Part 2 terrain generation. But first of all, I kind of had a question that's sort of related, but back in April, obviously, the team announced that the Caves and Cliffs update was going to be split in two to kind of ensure quality, to have adequate time to cope with the technical challenges. Now, a lot of those things are coming to light, and we're seeing exactly what those technical challenges are. And also to avoid having an impact on team health, avoid crunch and
Yes.
that kind of thing. And I'm sure a lot of this discussion is going to focus more on the technical side and the terrain generation. But before that, I'd like to ask, how is the team? And how has everyone managed to stay kind of focused and positive while they continue to work from home? Because I believe you all still are working from home rather than returning to the office.
Yeah, so I guess it's two questions there. One is about team health in light of the split and all that. It was really a major impact, positive impact on the team health to do the split, because we were really stressing out because we basically had a scope that was too big for us for what we could do in that time, which we knew was a risk. Changing the height of the world was a gamble, because it messes with the core of the game. And then it ended up being, really, really complicated and took most of the team's effort for a long time. That's when we realized that, okay, we can sort that out, but then we also want to, if we were to ship everything as planned on time, then we would have to cut so much scope. So we would be very disappointed, and we think the players would be disappointed too. So we kind of realized just by the process of elimination that, well, we don't want to ship Caves and Cliffs with a majorly reduced scope, but we also don't want to stress out the team, because that's just not a good idea for any reason at all. Both ethically, but also for the game itself, is just a bad idea. So we pretty much just did the math there and like, okay, we have to split this. And we preferred not to delay it, because we knew that there was a lot of players that would appreciate, the non-world gen parts of it. So we figured, let's ship that, make those players happy, give people something to play with over the summer, but also take that part off our chests. So, that's shipped. We don't have to think about that anymore. Now we can focus entirely on world generation. So it's definitely, I think, the right decision. But in terms of stress, well, it was stressful also after, because we had to do a lot of, voodoo to be able to do the split. Since we had to, the game really wasn't designed to be split in that way. It was supposed to be one thing. So it was a bit tricky, both technically, but also process-wise, how we organize our work, because we wanted to continue doing world gen stuff in the background, and we had to handle some technical stuff around how we organize our work. But once we got past that, we started getting closer to the summer. I think we got over the hump, and then plus people started having vacations, and we shipped 117. So now I think we're in a much better state in terms of stress. People are more rested, they're more relaxed, and a lot more focused. And in terms of, I can also mention that we were really, really, really moved by the community reaction when we talked about this, because we were kind of worried, are people going to get really angry and sad that we split this update? And of course, some people were disappointed, but overall, the amount of support given to the team was overwhelming, and we're really happy to see that, because we kind of want to encourage also other game companies to just not crunch, because it is a bit of a disease in our industry that companies tend to just say, hey, let's just throw hours at the problem and just burn everybody out and build something of bad quality. And we think it's better to just take it easy, don't stress, build better stuff, think long term, and we're happy that the community kind of supported us in that.
Yeah, around the time of that announcement, I remember us covering it on the show, and Joel and I both said it was just very well communicated. And one of the things that's been great with Mojang over the years is the transparency about the development process and the way developers will actively, interact with the community, whether that's, on Twitter, on Reddit, they'll pop into streams, they'll kind of check in with players, but also now, from a very personal standpoint, everyone knows that this is a weird time in everybody's lives, the pandemic affecting everybody, and obviously, we all care a great deal about the team, and the team has done a great job in presenting themselves to the general public as human beings. And so I think a lot of that really contributes to how that announcement was received. And yeah, I think the Minecraft community in general is one of the best communities I've been a part of in terms of the community understanding what the developers are doing to improve the game and to make sure that everyone stays healthy is a priority for the community as well as Mojang themselves.
Yeah, it's really a win. It's a win-win thing. We're all on the same team. We just want to make a great game, right? So
yeah, absolutely. And yeah,
but in terms of the pandemic, that's been a challenge, of course. Just like for all companies, we were 100% co-located, and suddenly we're 100% distributed from one day to the next. But given like it actually worked out better than I thought. I've done a bit of part of my job was also coaching, help us figure out how to work together, and it worked better than I thought to suddenly work distributed. Some things even work better than when we were in the same room. But overall, I would say it's been negative because working in a distributed fashion is fine, but being forced to do it all the time is a problem. We would have liked to at least once in a while get together to do workshops and stuff. Not being able to do that has been challenging. Plus, from a psychological perspective, it's pretty kind of undemocratic in a sense. When you work at office, most people have a similar kind of we're in the same place, working under the same conditions. But working from home, some people like me, I'm pretty lucky. I have a big house and I have a room which where I can like a home office. I have a good working environment at home, but a lot of people don't. So maybe they move to Sweden from another country. They have a small apartment, and then suddenly they're stuck in that small apartment. Or maybe they have small kids in the house, or a spouse that is also needs to work from home, and they're disrupting each other. So for some people, it's just a pain to work from home, and having to do that all the time is really hard.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to a world where people can choose more. Like sometimes we work together physically, sometimes we work from home, sometimes a bit of both. I think that'll be good.
Yeah, when we spoke to Brandon on the show, he was talking about having just moved to Stockholm from Australia, and then a couple of months later, everything shuts down and he has to stay in. And he's like, I don't know where anything is. Like, I still have to get kind of settled into this space. And, for such a big move and the first move of that kind he'd ever done, it must be, a tremendous strain. And I'm just hoping that, he has a long history working at Mojang and will be able to, actually interact with everybody
recoup
in
that
office environment again.
But I will say though that I mean at the end of the day we are an IT company. We can work at home perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
So I really feel empathy to all these other jobs people have. Like let's say you work at a restaurant or you're a taxi driver or something else where you basically can't work from home.
Yeah.
And then their lives get completely disrupted. So in a way we don't really have any right to complain at all. I mean we still have a job. We can still work effectively from home.
Yeah, always good to keep that perspective for sure.
I'm not sure if you can say, but provided there's a future where COVID-19 is less of a concern, do you feel that there's going to be some opportunities for Mojang to have people that work from home and come into the office either on specific days or specific events or for specific team meetings, that kind of thing? Do you think that's going to be an option rolling forward, or is it going to be trying to get everybody back into the office?
I think all options are on the table. So we're probably going to do like what I like about this organization is we're very much into experimenting with how we work. So nothing is taken for granted. And that includes this. So once we get the chance to go back to the office, the big conversation is going to be, okay, how much should we be at the office? How do we, who works from home when? And try to find the sweet spot. What kinds of things are best to do from home? What kind of things are best to do in the office? Personally, in my own head, what I think might be the most effective is to have a few days that are kind of by convention office days. So people try to be at the office during those days because then you know that everyone is around. You can have those spontaneous conversations, and then maybe a few days that are more like work from home days. So that means that if you're going to choose which days to be at home, which days to be at office, then most people will choose the same days. Which I think is good because my experience is that working fully co-located is awesome. Working fully distributed can also be awesome. But the mix can be quite disrupting when you have 3 people in the same room and 2 people on a screen. That I find doesn't work very well because then you have 3 people who are in the same physical room and the 2 other people are in another room because they're in a digital room. And then you're really not in the same room and it kind of gets complicated.
Yeah, I used to work in animation and television before video calling was as nearly as commonplace as it is now. It was possible, but it really wasn't as common. There certainly was no Zoom. We used to have some animators would work from home, sometimes purely because the studio that I would be working at would be usually a small studio, and we just didn't have the space. You'd need to hire 20 animators, and you've got space for 15. You've got to send 5 home, and those 5 that would be asked if they would be comfortable working from home would be usually the more senior animators, or a few of them that we knew we didn't necessarily have to handhold or teach or needed a lot of approval. We would just look, you've been in the industry for a few years. We know you're going to be okay to do this from home. But there was always that disconnect because their revisions would be either done via email or they'd have to come in and sit down with a supervisor and go over things. And so it was really challenging. But at the same time, there was also things in the office where it would be harder to get work done sometimes because then you get a bunch of people socializing and it ends up being a little bit too casual sometimes. It was also a bunch of artists and cartoonists and very liberal kind of business environment, so it wasn't as regimented as some places might have been back then. This was the early aughts, but that's really interesting to hear the benefits and the push and pull, and I definitely agree with you. Whenever I've been in a situation where it's been 2 or 3 people live and another 2 or 3 people digitally, it's always really challenging. There's always something that kind of you end up being more concerned about how the meeting is going from a technical standpoint than the actual content of the meeting. It's always a little bit tricky.
Someone's drawing something on a whiteboard. Can you guys see that now? Oh, wait a sec, let me turn the camera on. And then I can't hear you. And then, but yeah, if we're all distributed, if all of us are from home, then we're all in the same room in a sense, because we're all in the same digital room. We have the same video call. We have the same Google Doc or Miro board or whatever. And then I find can be really effective, actually.
Yeah, I mean, this podcast probably wouldn't exist without Google Docs, so I feel like we'd have such trouble exchanging show notes were it not for all of these great solutions out there.
Emailing back and forth.
Yeah, pretty much. So let's get back into talking about the changes to terrain, because I know this is what a lot of our audience is going to be interested in. So for the more technical audience, for people who probably know what you mean when you say a noise map, can you explain what's different about the experimental terrain generation? Because biomes are now independent from terrain height and shape, and there's a little bit more going on under the hood there than there was previously. So do you want to give us basically a layman's version of that for the folks listening?
Sure. So a bit of background there. With the Nether update, we introduced a new way of biome placement called multi-noise placement. And I believe Slice Slime has made a good video introducing it. But basically the way that works is that throughout the world, there are a number of noise fields. We call them weird things such as humidity and temperature and continentalness and stuff. And that means that at any given point in the world, there are basically hidden values. They're actually visible now on the F3 screen, I think, nowadays. But so in this particular position here, there might be humidity might be minus 0.5 and temperature might be positive 0.3. And then I travel for a little bit and temperature gradually goes up or gradually goes down. So it's basically like a 5-dimensional space of numbers there, which vary gradually through Perlin noise. And then we basically configured different biomes to live in different configurations of those numbers. And that's how we decide whether there should be what's it called, Crimson Forest or something. But this way of placing biomes, we knew that when we made the Caves and Cliffs update, we would need to change how we place biomes anyway, because we need to have 3D biomes, right? And we need to be able to have a place where there's a forest above surface and, let's say, dripstone caves below. And that's completely new. So we had to revisit biome placement anyway, and decided to go with multi-noise because it's just easier to work with. So, and in conjunction with that, we kind of had to revisit in general how we place biomes. We also had an insight when we were making the cave biomes, the lush caves and dripstone caves, because when we were making those biomes, we realized that normally when biomes are placed in the world, the biome decides the shape of the terrain. So it is configured at the biome level that, let's say, plains is configured to be quite low elevation and quite flat, while, let's say, forest is going to be quite low elevation but a little bit more rough terrain. And from a technical perspective, when I say rough terrain, I basically mean more 3D noise. So 3D noise basically is by default, the world is just a big random mess. we use the word cheese noise for caves to describe how this looks like. Think of a big Swiss cheese with big holes everywhere. That's default how the overworld looks like. But then that random mess is kind of pushed down and biased in such a way that a surface will form at some point. And below that surface will be solid, and above that surface will be air. And different biomes will squeeze that 3D noise in different ways. So plains will squeeze most of it away. But in the opposite extreme, Shattered Savanna leaves most of the 3D noise in place. So with Shattered Savanna, you get a glimpse into what the actual world generation looks like before we do all this offsetting. But anyway, so biomes control this, which means that if we wanted to have, let's say, a forest that is not low elevation, we want forest to be in a hilly area, we literally had to make a new biome called, Birch Forest Hills, for example, which is the same exact biome, but with another number for the terrain shape. And this was fine, but now we got to the point where when we were going to place these underground biomes, these numbers didn't make sense anymore. What is elevation for a cave biome that's underground? So we kind of had to rethink, and we made this decision after a while that let's have the cave biomes adapt to whatever terrain they find. So let's make the caves generate independently of biomes, like the cave shapes and everything. And then the biomes will just be placed independently of whether they're big or large caves there, and they'll just adapt. And that reduced the amount of code we had to write, but also gave us basically infinite variety, because you could find that, a lush cave inside a tiny, tiny, tiny little area, or a massive mega cave. Both of them can contain lush caves. We just had to be a bit smart with the feature placement, so they'll adapt to whatever is there. And the result of that was really positive. We were like, wow, this is really cool. We got really incredible variation here. And we didn't need to create a bunch of special, large lush caves, small lush caves, etc. It was just one biome which just adapts. So inspired by that, we kind of realized that since we're now placing big mountains on the surface, we need to think about how we place biomes and how we can make those mountains less kind of clash with the terrain. Like, can we make the terrain generally hillier first and then have a big mountain, instead of just having the big mountain plop down on existing terrain? So how can we make this kind of fit in? And that's when we decided that, hey, let's take this little trick we did of decoupling, the biome from the terrain shape, and let's apply that in above the surface as well. So that's kind of where we ended up doing. So we basically said that instead of saying the multi-noise parameters have decided that this is going to be jungle because it's a humid area and a hot area, so that means jungle. And because it's a jungle, it's going to be flat. Instead, we say these multi-noise parameters decide that it's a jungle, and the same multi-noise parameters also decide that it's going to be a hilly area, and therefore we get a hilly jungle. And this gives us just an incredible variation. Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, and it's so fascinating now walking around the terrain and seeing how different some of these biomes look that haven't had that terrain variation before. It's I've got a couple of screenshots where there is a jungle just on the side of one of the new mountains, and and that's the kind of thing that seems completely alien to players who've been playing this game for the last decade, because we're used to the way the world works now. And I think this kind of feeds back into what we were saying earlier about it providing new challenge and disrupting the way players typically expect the game to go. And I think that's one of the things that's made exploring these experimental snapshots so fascinating for players, is because Minecraft is doing stuff that we're not used to it doing. And for people who've had this much experience with the game, that's the stuff that really gets us fascinated again.
It is. But of course, as with everything, it comes with challenges, right? So for example, although we've decoupled the biome from terrain shape, we don't want to, like, technically they're completely decoupled. We could make them completely independent, but we have through configuration made them slightly coupled by just saying that, like, let's say, for example, meadows, right? Meadows is a biome that is intended to be used at higher elevation. So kind of like a plains, but higher up, to let you overlook the world, but also have maybe a mountain range behind you. We were inspired by Sound of Music, right? How can we make these meadows? So that biome does have an opinion on terrain shape, but instead of saying that the biome is going to make the terrain that shape, we just configure the biome so it happens to coincide with that terrain shape. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's great seeing the way those meadows form up and whether they kind of lead up into a mountain, or the ones that Joel and I have found when we've been exploring have been usually like they've almost had a donut shape surrounding a basin with a different biome in it. And the amount of different configurations that those form, even though the sort of plateau that they form itself is usually like, you know, a somewhat predictable shape, it's still providing those experiences that seem familiar to players once they've gone through these worlds a couple of times, but you know they've still got hidden surprises in them as well.
And that's again the challenge of variation, because what's nice is we get a lot of variation because it's not an exact science. We can't configure exactly how a biome will look like, but we can configure them so that it roughly coincides with terrain shape in some cases. For example, you'll mostly find snowy slopes and the new peak biomes. They're going to coincide with peaky terrain, which is great, but it's not always going to be 100% mapping. So sometimes you will find meadows that are quite low down. Sometimes you might find what technically is a peak biome, but it might be in lower terrain. And we don't really have 100% control as we had in the past. The advantage to that is, even as developers, we'll get surprised, like, whoa, look what just happened. And as long as the majority of those surprises are positive surprises, then that would offset those times when you get something looking really ugly, hopefully.
Because of the way that you're describing the relationship between the terrain generation and the biomes, when it comes to making adjustments in the background, how finite and how much control do you have over that? Is it a matter of like adjusting these numbers in a way that you think is going to give you the results that you want and then just having to go into Minecraft and see what it looks like? Or do you have more of an idea of what to expect when you make those adjustments?
So this is something that it's kind of a skill that we've had to build up. In the beginning, when I worked on this, I really didn't know what I was doing. So I would poke a number and see what happens and be like, oh, that just happened. What if I poke it in another direction? Oh, now this happened. But then as you work with it, you after a while start to understand the math more properly. And then you start after a while getting to a point where I can predict that, hey, I want the rivers to be wider. I think I should change this number. But if I change that number, I suspect this side effect might happen. So I need to go look for that. And that's kind of a skill that we're trying to build up as a team. But tooling helps a lot too, because we don't want to have to rely on experience and guesswork. We want people to be able to see. We don't want to just have one or two people be able to do tuning because they've gone through all the hard work of learning this. We want pretty much anyone to be able to sit down and say, hey, I'm going to play with these numbers and see what happens. So we've built up some tools, mostly internally so far, but maybe we can make some of them external later on. But basically visualization tools that show us the biome distribution, all the multi-noises, the elevation map. And looking at that map, I can change a number and reload it immediately and see that, okay, all the rivers got wider. So I don't have to actually start up the game to see it. And that saves a lot of time. But also various diagnostic tools where I can look at a profile of how the terrain shape looks like from the side. And then if I change a number, I can see that, okay, now all the mountains seem to be steeper. But at the end of the day, we have to play the game also. So it's typically when I've been working a lot with this past few months and found a pretty good workflow, which basically is I have two computers. On one computer, I'm running the development environment. On the other computer, I'm running the latest snapshot. It's two separate computers because of performance. It's running all this stuff. It just takes so much performance from the computer. So then I have a side-by-side view. And on my development computer, I'm running the development environment and all these mapping tools to show me what's going on. And then I basically make a list of things I want to fix. Like, for example, I want mesas to show up properly, badlands to show up on plateaus and not just random splotches everywhere. So then I would look for some places in the world where it looks really bad. And the community has been really helpful. Sometimes I put out a tweet and say, hey, people, can you show me where this happens? And then I get 100 answers and seeds and coordinates. It's super awesome. So I just take some of those examples, fly to that place on both computers, the same place. And then I look at, okay, why did this happen? Why did this ugly badlands show up in the middle of a jungle? And I start analyzing what happened. And once I understand that, okay, it's because of this noise or because of that thing, then I form a hypothesis for, well, if I change this value, is it going to improve it? I change a few values, try it until that looks good. Then I fly around randomly on both computers to look at what have I messed up. Because quite often fixing one problem causes another problem. So it's a lot of just flying around, looking at the world and saying, damn it, now all the mountains are smaller. Did I really want that? And it's hard work. It's kind of tricky, but it's also quite fun and quite relaxing because I'm sitting there flying around, exploring the world, and making it better.
I was going to use the Matrix analogy of seeing the code, but I realized how silly that sounds talking to a developer, because that is literally what you're doing. But
it is literally.
But at that point, you are just kind of once you have enough experience with it, you can sort of navigate that stuff by feel.
A little bit,
but then going back to what you were saying about making sure that everybody can do this, I think that's a really exciting prospect if some of the tools you use internally are at a state where they can be made available to the community. I think that's an option that excites a lot of people, because I've definitely seen a lot of people, now that terrain is being worked on in ways like this, speculating about whether or not world customization options are going to exist in Minecraft like they used to in the past, where you could create a custom world. There are a lot of sliders you could drag around and numbers you could change to adjust the parameters, which I think has moved over to custom dimension data packs more now. But I've seen a lot of people kind of wondering about whether that's the right thing for players, because it's maybe a little less user friendly or maybe more daunting to get into at first.
Yeah, it is hard. Like we in a perfect world, we'll be able to make all the numbers, all the secret numbers in the code visible, in config files, which would be great. It's just a matter of time, right?
Yeah. But
if we can make everything visible, then players can tinker with it. But without the tools, then you'll have to be a genius to be able to do something cool with it, because it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
So I really hope we can make some of the tools available, but we'll see. I can't promise anything there.
Yeah, I definitely remember trying to create a couple of custom world presets in the past, dragging one slider just a little bit too much, and then suddenly most of my world is ocean, and there are just rock spikes all the way to build limit. And I go, what
Exactly.
What did I do? What did
Why
adjusting that one number did so much? So the amount of fine tuning and control you must have over these processes is kind of mind blowing to me as a casual approach to world generation.
But when it comes to UI stuff, I guess a bit of a kind of we want to be mindful of how we spend our time.
Mm-hmm.
So if we focus on making the game fun, that's kind of number one. But then we want to make as much stuff customizable as possible. That would be, I guess, number two. But then making a fancy GUI on top of it is a distant third or a tenth somewhere down the line, because it's something that the community could do as well. So it's kind of like, what are the things that we need to do? What are the things that actually anyone can do? Then maybe instead of us spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to make this UI work, we just make all the data available for as a starting point. And then we'll see, if anyone gets around to making a nice UI for changing the numbers.
And people have done fantastic things either with modding the game or with data packs at this point, just because those details, those kind of internal things have started to be surfaced a little bit more. So I think it's a good approach, and the fact that obviously Mojang is still like a relatively small team and people have to kind of fine tune things and work on stuff individually means that it can't develop in leaps and bounds in the same way, but you're working on a base game that is still such a great experience on its own that people can then start to imprint their own ideas onto later.
Yeah.
You mentioned having two computers in the office, one running the development world and the other one running the snapshot. What kind of performance challenges have surfaced by adding 128 blocks of height to the entire overworld? I know that there hasn't been a lot of or any optimization just yet, and Mojang has been very clear about that in the snapshots. But what challenges have you seen surface?
Oh, it's a huge challenge. It's the number one challenge of the whole update, I would say, because everything in the game. Well, first of all, the technical challenge to get it to even work, because everything in the game was hard coded on that existing world height. So changing the world height just broke everything everywhere, and we're still playing whack-a-mole, catching little bugs here and there. So that was kind of number one, was to get it to work at all, and number two is to make it scale, and that's I guess what we're working on right now and have been for quite some time on both platforms. Well, mainly I guess the problem is that chunks are just vertical, right? When you load a chunk, you load everything from top to bottom. In a perfect world, the game wouldn't be designed like that. Why would we generate a chunk at the bottom of the world if you can't see it or interact with it? But that would be another war to fight in the future, because now that's so deeply built into the game that it's going to be hard to change for this update. But that means that as it is right now, when you run around the world, it's going to load the full vertical, chunks, everything from top to bottom. And yeah, there's lots of challenges around. Can we do little tricks? Can we avoid at least rendering some things that aren't visible? Um, Things like that. But also, just as there's more stuff going on, right? If you're near a mountain range, there's just about twice as much places where mobs can spawn and where there are things ticking and water flowing and things happening. So we just need to just optimize the hell out of this, and that's kind of what we're trying to do.
And it's the kind of thing where you also have to consider once players start building it in this, there's going to be redstone logic happening in some of these chunks as well. And yeah, exactly. the resigned sigh almost starts to come through, and players are going to have to mess with this sooner or later. So
yep, and in even just the world generation, because there's all these caves, for example, it's a whole new layer of things being generated. It's just more going on both during world generation and while playing the game. So we're optimizing it. What I guess the good news is we are making some progress there, but I wouldn't say we're not out of the woods yet on this. We're still a little bit worried about it, but hoping to. We have a lot of people focusing on it, so I guess that's positive.
Yeah, and hopefully you've still got plenty of time to work on that. As far as the current experimental snapshots go, have you been surprised by any of the feedback you've seen from these snapshots? Were you expecting some features to be controversial that have just been embraced wholly by the community? Or is there anything you thought, yeah, this is an obvious win that the community has gone, actually, we're not quite so keen on this? Can you think of any examples there?
Well, mainly getting those snapshots out was a massive relief because we were really worried about, since we have a lot of tech stuff to sort out, we don't want to get to a point where we can't snapshot until September, and only then do we start getting community feedback on all these major changes. So we were really keen on. That's why we ended up doing this kind of weird thing with the experimental snapshots. We're like, hey, let's just cheat the system and say let's put this out in existing shape on the side while we sort out technical stuff, so that we at least can get feedback on it from a gameplay perspective while working on other things. So that's been very useful. But in terms of feedback, mostly the feedback has been stuff that I expected people to say, which is kind of a relief. I was positively surprised because, I really like the new world gen, but I'm kind of biased. Having been living inside this for a year. But I was really kind of a little bit worried, what are players going to say? Are they going to like it as much as we do? Or are they going to say, no, this is too different, this is too weird? But I was really happy to see that people in general seem to really like both the caves and the mountains and the new terrain shapes. So that was a major relief, which just confirmed that we're on the right track here. The whole approach of changing how we generate the terrain and how we place biomes, that approach seems to be viable from a gameplay perspective, which is good. There's a lot of things to improve, and the things people have mentioned, such as microbiomes showing up here and there and flooding of caves sometimes. Other things. And of course, performance. These are things we knew, but it's very good to get confirmed that it's not just us thinking that. So yeah, overall, not terribly surprised and mostly relieved that players seem to like the stuff where the direction things are heading.
One of the questions we had from a listener was actually focused on the landscape and their experience doing landscaping in Minecraft and how, in their words, tedious it could be. And they had mentioned that they've heard that Mojang wants to stay true to the gameplay principle of always placing one block at a time, and how large-scale projects can just be really daunting to a player. And now with the new scale of 118, they were concerned that players might get turned off by just so much material to move around. Is that a concern with the increase of the world, not just from a technical standpoint, from a gameplay standpoint? Do you worry about maybe creating an environment where the players feel daunted by what's in front of them?
Well, there's, I guess, a higher level question about that, which is new versus old, right? We're changing the way the world looks. And this is a hugely popular and successful game where people are used to the way it normally looks, right? And there's all this gameplay that is optimized for the current way Minecraft works. So one of the big challenges, how do we strike the balance between the new and cool stuff versus the old and recognizable Minecraft that everyone has come to love? That's really hard. And our strategy has kind of been to provide both by just having variation in the world. So if you prefer a a part, if you prefer a flatter terrain that looks more like Minecraft usually looks like, you should be able to find that. I think you can find that even now. You can find large areas that don't have any of the new mountains. And then I guess the only thing you would need to do is go exploring until you find it. And then other players will be like, no, the old is boring. I want the new crazy mountains. Then, if you search far enough, you will find them. But of course, some things are unavoidable. If you are the kind of player who wants to clear out a whole chunk down to the bottom of the world, that is going to be a royal pain now because of the deeper world and Deep Slate. It's just the cost of this update. And if that's going to be a blocker, then you'll basically have no choice but to either go back to an older version or use a mod. But hopefully most styles of gameplay, including terraforming, we hope that people will still be able to do those things that they're used to doing. I guess there's another aspect to it. The one block at a time thing is that we kind of like the notion that if you want to clear out, if you want to dig out a whole chunk, or you want to take a mountain apart or something, you might need to ask your friends for help. It might become this big project, which could be kind of a reason to collaborate and a reason to have some fun together. So we don't want to make things too easy either.
I think that makes a lot of sense, especially for people who are able to play in multiplayer environments. I think there's a lot of community spirit can happen around, okay, I want to hollow out this entire mountain. I want to dig a perimeter for a redstone farm. I want to, clear out this area of the nether. There's definitely a lot of good, community projects that can revolve around activities like that. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I sort of feel like our correspondent from that question should talk to the person who emailed the show that we read out earlier that had no mountains for 1,500 blocks. It's just swap the seeds around and maybe you'll have a better time. And I've certainly found both. Like I generated a few worlds in Experimental Snapshot 2. The first one I found was swamp as far as the eye could see, and then some really sheer cliffs. And
yeah, I saw that. I was like, what the heck is that?
Exactly.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, and it was like kind of Shattered Savannah generation, but at a more kind of plains level. And then, a few, seeds down the line, I came upon one that was like mostly mountains at spawn, and it felt like you were never going to get out of them. And so I think really it's going to be a matter of maybe re-rolling worlds more frequently to find the kind of spawn area that you want, which I don't think has necessarily been an approach many people have taken from single-player environments. A lot of the time you generate a world and you just kind of go with what you've got. But I do think with some of these it's going to be a matter of trying out a few different worlds and doing more of the hunting for world seeds that some folks do.
Well, either that, when I play, I prefer not to do that. I prefer to take whatever I got, but then I go exploring, which is pretty much the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I just keep running until I find the type of world I want. Yeah,
and it's just a matter of finding the stuff that helps you traverse that at this point. But
although I can say that particular video that you did, at the time I was really doing some terrain tuning at the time, and I saw that and I was like, oh, those cliffs are really ugly. So that video actually helped me to round out those kind of cliffs, so they'll be better in the next snapshot.
That's great. Glad I could help.
Because I was like, that shouldn't happen. But it was funny. Well, by the way, I realized I lied about something just now. I said that the players who don't like the deeper world or the higher mountains might have to go back to an older version or get a mod, but that's not true. You could probably just get a data pack too, because, since we now have a world height that can be changed, then that will be a data packable thing, most likely. So that means you'll hopefully be able to not have to run a mod or another version. You could probably run the same version, but with the data pack to get a world that is, not as deep or not as many mountains.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Or the alternative is, is something that might be tougher than current computers can handle. I remember when that value first got exposed and everyone got very excited about the world height changing and people generating worlds that had a height of thousands and going, okay, my computer's not going to be able to handle this. What is Mojang planning?
Like you're on your own now with that, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's cool that the option is there, and I feel like with a lot of the times with technology these days, people are laying in stuff like that for the future and making games that are almost too good for current generation hardware, or like the cutting edge hardware is just about able to play it, because then in a couple of years time when the technology has gone on even further and we have faster CPUs, faster GPUs, people are going to have more opportunity to get hold of some of that stuff.
Hopefully, I guess I'm a little bit worried though. I don't want Minecraft to become the kind of game that forces people to buy new computers.
Yeah, no,
all the time,
of course, and I think that's one of the things that it's great to hear the team's still committed to making sure performance is optimized for this this update, because there are still people who are playing on decade-old hardware that played Minecraft in beta and just aren't able to move on to the newer versions. So.
Yeah, and I guess that there is going to be. I don't think it's going to be possible to make it work as fast because it just is a more complicated game now. Mm-hmm. There's more stuff going on.
Yeah.
So it is going to be slower. I can't imagine us making it the same as before. If we do, I'll be very happy, very surprised. But I guess so. In my mind, it's really about, can we at least minimize the difference, right?
Yeah, and at the same time, you need to be able to move the game forward and make moves like this, which are going to be so fundamental to gameplay for the next however long.
Yeah.
To wrap things up and touch on something that you mentioned a little bit earlier, Henrik, I know after I played the experimental snapshot for the first time, I said to Jonny in a DM that this is the biggest thing to ever happen to Minecraft as far as I've been playing. Do you find that feeling rings true around Mojang these days?
I would say yes. Both from a gameplay perspective, it just looks so different, but also from a technical perspective, it has been a huge thing to make this work. So in general, I think our feeling is that this is like any other future update is going to feel like a walk in the park in comparison. Or at least I feel so now naively. I might have to regret what I just said, but it just feels so right now compared to other updates that this was just bigger.
Yeah, and I think the team has also communicated that it's bigger, and I mean, even in stuff like, the video about the split, but before that, when the Caves and Cliffs update was announced, everybody was talking about this being an update that you guys really wanted to talk to the community about, and that it was an update that the community had effectively championed for this long, that it was going to be very important to make sure the community was involved with the development of this. And I think this does now feel more so than ever before that it's such a big update and the community has such big involvement in it at the same time.
Yeah, it's really cool. It really feels like the community is like an extension of the design team because people are so involved and giving us so useful feedback.
Yeah, well, we're going to have to wrap up here, but Henrik, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. This has been such a cool, insightful, and positive discussion, and I can't wait to hear what our audience has to say about some of the stuff you've shared with us today. Where can people go if they want to follow your work? And while you're here, is there anything you would like to quickly promote?
Well, I guess Twitter and YouTube, I guess, are the main channels where I put stuff. So I guess that's where you can follow me. And in terms of other things, I guess this is a very much unrelated thing, but I've worked a bit within climate change. You mentioned my startup, goclimate.com, but if you're curious about climate change, because it is a big deal, and we're seeing more and more of the effects of it. If you want to understand what it's all about, I made a video that really tries to explain it. So the video is called "Friendly Guide to Climate Change." It explains where is the problem coming from, why should we care about it, what can we do about it. And it tries to present a kind of holistic picture in a kind of entertaining format. So use that if you just want to understand what's actually going on.
That's awesome. And with somebody who is obviously changing the world of Minecraft, obviously it makes sense to want to change the world around us for the better. So that's really great. Thank you so much once again for being on the show. And that's going to wrap it up for this episode of The Spawn Chunks. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff we talked about today, including all of Henrich's links at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show was composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud as ever to be a listener-supported podcast. Like we said at the top of the show, if you're getting some value out of the show, you can put some value back in by visiting patreon.com/thespawnchunks. You can join our community, you can listen to the regular shows that we record live in our Discord, and pledging at any level gets you an invite to that Discord where you can chat with other like-minded Minecraft fans. It also gets us closer to our monthly Minecraft audio hangout goal, where we would sit down every month with our patrons and just have a big chat about what everyone's been doing in Minecraft lately. Our Patreon base is currently at 259, which is down 7 from last week as Patreon goes through its monthly processing shenanigans. But our last week's Patreon count was 266. Would love to see that climb again as the month of August rolls on. We want to give a special thanks to our content engineers, General Patton 82, Hunter 555, Jumbo Sale, Magma Cube, and Yitz. Thank you so much for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on Twitter and Instagram, but a personal recommendation is by far the best way to share the podcast. Just poke a friend in the arm from a safe distance and tell them where they can go to listen to The Spawn Chunks. Where might that be? On iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. Really, wherever you can find a podcast. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked on the spawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Jonny, but online I go by Pixel Riffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/pixelriffs, where my Empire's SMP, Hardcore Survival Guide, and RTX Survival series are all ongoing. I stream 3 days a week on Twitch, doing behind-the-scenes work for my YouTube content, and this week over on Twitch, I'll be co-commentating a Hermitcraft Twitch Rivals event called Hermit Raiders. That's going to be on Thursday, August 5th at 6 p.m. BST, 1 p.m. EST over at twitch.tv/Twitch Rivals. I've seen what they're doing for this event. It is wild. You don't want to miss this. Aside from that, I'm at Pixel Riffs on both Twitter and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything I'm doing online, including my illustration and design portfolio, is at joelduggan.com. You can listen to The Citadel Cafe, my other podcast, at thecitadelcafe.com. This week, we are talking about Masters of the Universe Revelation and what a new viewer should do if they're approaching the Star Wars saga. You can check that out later on this week. And of course, you can follow me at Joel Duggan on social media and Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I am hopefully wrapping up this zombie geode farm this week on the Citadel.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, and the hills are alive with the sound of donkeys?